Hello. I'm making a new video on one of the first computers I had, and this is the Packard Bell Legend 3540. So this was my first computer back in 1995 or early 96, I believe, and I was around 10 years old or so, and obviously I use this computer a lot since I'm talking about it. But um, what I really find interesting about it is um, how how much internet use has changed over the years. Just a few days ago, I read this article called Offline is Just Online with Extreme Latency. And there's a video from the summer of 2022. It covers basically this idea called local first software. Um, it's really just about designing software and systems don't have to be that don't have to be online or supported by software as a service or website as a infrastructure as a service, that sort of thing. And one of the things I really liked about this article is it is kind of getting back to that idea about offline is just online with extreme latency. But the main thing is when I was in um, when I was uh, in middle school, like there was no internet that everybody used. Like our parents bought this to help us print out school papers, and actually we this was our printer, so we bought a computer just to print school papers mainly. I mean, we also planned to use it for other things, but like this was the printer, and we had to get ink replaced every so often. But I was able to find the exact model because I remember it was a DeskJet 600. I mean, it was a pretty simple enough model number to remember. And obviously, not everything needs paper to print as much today as back then, but just like how times have changed, it's really remarkable how um, a lot of software that is used is just kind of built on the expectation that it's always online. And I just think that a lot of productivity, at least early on when I was growing up, just helped with focus on productivity, just because um, like the first 2 years of having this computer was not even online. It was even though technically it could go online, like that was never really like the main reason for using it. It was like so that one could have word processing access. This is the Windows 95 like startup. So this is basically exactly what I had. Now this video here does have a lot of other software that came with my Packard Bell, and I'm gonna do a video on that shortly. Or I'm gonna play some of that video. But so this was like a brand new install, although it doesn't have any bloatware in here. But you do have like things like Notepad set up the Microsoft network, and you would definitely get a lot more there. Let me close this thing. Just want to exit this for briefly. It doesn't look like that's working. Okay, well I'll just return to that later. But yeah, this video is LGR. It was posted a couple years ago, and it's kind of a weird shape for it's kind of a weird shape for a desktop. but it was basically identical to the monitor that I had. Like, this is a pretty common monitor, and I didn't have this. I've never even seen this before except until like a couple of days ago. I had the same exact. I still have this mouse, and I still have this keyboard, and this I never had a remote like that. It wasn't included with the 3541. But just to look at the specs here, it is actually identical. It looks like the base model was a 8 megabyte RAM, 100 megahertz Intel Pentium, and it had a 1 gigabyte hard disk, which I had, and I also had 1 megabyte of video RAM. There it is. So 1 megabyte of video memory. So, they have video cards with 24 gigs today. So it's pretty remarkable how little video memory. And then 1 gigabyte probably was pretty big at the time, even though it wasn't really fast. I mean, there were already 16 meg PCs out at the time. But I did kind of like the fact that it had 1 gigabyte. It always felt like a big amount. And even with Windows pre-installed, it only required about 90 megabytes. I think it required like 75 megabytes of disk space. So you still had about like probably at least 800 megabytes if you don't include all the other programs that were installed. I'm not really sure how we managed to save documents, but we eventually we did run out of space, but it didn't run out like that quickly, even though it might seem like you would just run out like in a day. But but this is a really remarkable thing because it did so many things, and like today there's so many computers that also do a lot of things, but this was like it was able to run so many different CDs and everything. So the whole concept of applications, like they were physical, and when you have a CD, that there's just that expectation that or that peace of mind where you don't have to really worry about the internet, just to access something. Because like apps don't, by definition, have to be online just to operate. So this article is kind of emphasizing how low of a priority internet is, even though, as a techie, you might want to use the internet. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense to think that the internet is always first. So having that offline mentality growing up definitely helps with not really needing to expect everything having to be online, and sort of developing maybe an operating system or a PC system that doesn't really require everything to be online just to operate. So getting into this video, it does have some pretty cool it goes into the hardware, but I like all the CDs that they go through because there's a lot of pre-installed applications. So let me see if I can get that running here. Okay. Looks like... Okay, never mind.
Memorable in my mind programs, but look at all these things. Look at all this. You have alternatives to a lot of stuff that Windows can do, but dang it, it just does it with a Packard Bell flair that is amazing and is just delightfully mid-90s. You're going to love some of this stuff if you haven't seen it, or if you have seen it, you're going to love seeing it again. I promise.
So, yeah, I have like the same... I probably grew up in a parallel universe because this person probably had a very similar Packard Bell and maybe had a similar experience or mindset when it comes to like growing up with offline computers. Now, as you will see here, there is a little internet icon here, and obviously there was internet back then, but one of the interesting things about this PC is that when I first got this computer, I mean, obviously I did see the Microsoft network and the internet, but like this was never something that I really even used for like the first 2 years of having it. So, I mean, it might come as a surprise to like anyone who was, born after, the year 2000 or something, but just using something like a desktop here, like this was like the main feature. Like everything on this computer you could actually um I mean, there's just a lot of things you can just learn about computers, and like learning how a computer functions can be without even having internet. And I think that's one of the things that are missing today, like in not just learning how to like type and communicate, but just the fact that you can learn everything just by learning how to read. I mean, there's quite a bit of self-instruction that you can just by having something like this. So I think just the having a computer that is has a lot of software pre-installed, obviously since you don't really need CDs so much, I think it's a really valuable design feature that's just kind of missing. um, Something like a Chromebook, emphasizes that you have to go online to use a lot of the features, but having an offline, computer with plenty of software can be good for programming, learning how to um, uh, obviously program, but that's not the only thing. Having an encyclopedia, of course, doesn't have to be like Wikipedia, but just having like reading material is good. But of course, you want to have something that's, not gonna hurt your eyes after reading for so many hours. But just having something that can be like uh, a library is so valuable today that I think it just kind of gets forgotten in like a world where everything is just like a smartphone. Or obviously a smartphone is definitely going to be convenient, but it's just not the same as having like a monitor where you can like actually see something that resembles more the size of like a book, or a book or a magazine. Um, so getting back into some of the applications, I had a lot of the CDs that this person had. I didn't have like Duke Nukem or Doom, but I did have a lot of the like even just like some of the navigational software. It was just completely from that era. Like there was just no era that obviously that I can relate to. If you grew up in the 80s, you might be more familiar with DOS. And I had an uncle who had a 286, and I remember using some really like primitive Word or some text editor, and this was obviously like color. It was very colorful. It was not like monochrome, or it wasn't like it wasn't just like blue and white. It was like 16-bit or 256 color. It was so like so much better than like a Nintendo. Like even the Nintendo from I think 1990, like it was definitely rich in colors, but when I was like 6 or 7, I didn't. Well, I think I was 6 years old. Like I think we even had like an Atari for a year. Like someone just gave it to us, a family that didn't, you know, like a relative, but they didn't, want it anymore. But like the Atari, it was connected to this like 27-inch like RCA TV. It was like this huge, CRT, and it was like this really round monitor. Like, even though it was not like a circular TV, it was still like very curvy on the sides. So playing something like Nintendo was okay because it was just like a simple game, but it was never something you could really use it as a monitor. And we didn't have monitors when, well, at least when I was growing up, before I was like 10. So this was like my first like desktop computer, and because obviously it wasn't, there were no smartphones, there were no, well, there were not cell phones that anyone in my family used. And um, and so like the whole idea that you're sitting at a table and like interacting with this monitor. I mean, it has like speakers on the side of it. It's kind of anthropomorphic in the sense because it's like, they look like ears. So it it had a very like friendly. It looked a little bit like the Mac Performa. Maybe it was kind of copying it. I think they probably tried to copy like the smooth edges and everything. So it has this like really like sleek, look to it. So I don't know how well it sells, but I think despite the brand, like I think it was definitely one of the it was a good brand in the sense that it was like very user friendly. Um, I mean, I didn't really grow up using Linux. I kind of just got into that later on. But let me just play some of the videos here. I'll lower the audio. Um, so some of these were just more like meta, like it was just teaching you how to use the computer, and some of the stuff wasn't really. You didn't really use it after like you had everything installed. It was like more like for people who never used a computer, and I think that's why they had all this software. But it was really like a demonstration of like all this other technology that was going on at the same time, like CD players. It was new for people who probably never had a CD player before. Like, even though there were CD players, like the computer might have been the first CD player for some people. And then of course there were phones and other other electronics here like stereos and stuff. But let me try to find something else here. Maybe I missed something here. I did have the MIDI player. It was a very it was really cool for playing some like video game music. There were some you could just get online, and they were sort of recomposed sheet music. I recall there were quite a few other. Oh, this is one. Yeah, I had a Spider-Man. This CD came with I had a Toonland, Spider-Man, Silent Steel, SI Almanac, the MS Encarta. I had Journeyman, Home Projects. I think that was the one that was just playing earlier. Guinness 95, I believe I had. Family Health, I had. Cookbook and Action. So I had almost all of these applications. I don't remember having the Pirate Who Wouldn't Wash, but I could be wrong. I don't really think I used it. And so this was this was like Photoshop, but it was like animation too. It was so amazing, like to see all this stuff back at the time. Here, I'll turn on the audio. I mean, the videos was even on 8 megabytes of RAM. Like, it ran really smooth. It was amazing.
Well, that's going to take a while. So the whole idea behind this is to make Spider-Man cartoons. And there's a lot of sounds for everything. Let's go to his bedroom here. I think that's what this is. Somebody's bedroom. So let's put a flaming pumpkin green goblin thing or whatever. There we go. You got coloring book pages. So yeah, if you want, you could just like set up a whole coloring book thing, print it out. And then you can also just place down little bits of things. Color stuff. And there we go. And you can play it back. Yeah, that's the idea behind this. Look at the animations. Stop fighting or you will miss the show. It's a great cartoon. Anyway, so that.
So this is like so intuitive in the sense that like you're learning how a computer works, but you're also learning how to like make animations and like basically become a graphic designer just using tools that other people made for you. Like I found it so so fascinating that like even though I mean obviously I needed to know how to read to like use some of the tools, like I just find it fascinating how much perhaps learning things on your own happens. Like I can't think how many hours I spent, not hours but probably like months on this computer. Like thinking back, this is almost 30 years ago. um I don't I just can't imagine like if you've only grown up using like a smartphone, or maybe you have like a tablet or a laptop. Like I just think this entire phase of someone's life not needing to learn how a computer works and just having all the apps on your phone already, like you might not really need to learn much about how a computer works if even before computers were really mass marketed. Like obviously my parents might not know how to use certain desktop applications, and not that they really need to. Although sometimes they would compose a letter that they would mail to someone, if it was like a formal thing. But typically, if you're learning how to use a computer, some of those skills aren't really transferable. I mean, they are a lot of times if you're seeking some sort of IT role, but obviously today a lot of the roles are much more advanced for certain things. But I mean, even things like customer service, um, some people do learn how to use a desktop or like a virtual machine, even though they might not have grown up with one. I'm guessing the process has to be somewhat um, like some of the process of using a computer remotely, or not remotely, but using things that you may not have ever grown up with probably have a steeper learning curve than like the way I still use computers. I mean, even though I have a smartphone and I have a tablet, it's just that I still prefer the desktop, just because you can learn so much more. Like you just have a lot more control over, the applications that you have access to. So just having like this big drawing board is basically what I think of as a computer. It's not so much about the app sort of presenting like a simple interface. It's more about knowing what the interface, does and what options you have. So maybe it's just like a different type of like um, maybe some people think of computers as like different tools than others, but like since they're just so powerful, like having something like a physical desktop can sometimes open up more doors to viewing computers as not just like not just as a communication device, but being sort of like you know an inventor, because you're inventing like different types of communication, and you're inventing ideas. You're getting new ideas just based on having a new a desktop that could not really compose letters. I mean, obviously it's helping you write use word processing, but you still don't really have all the tools that you would on as compared to like if you're on a phone. Because if you have a phone, you can't really do much on it. I mean, you can obviously send, you know, pictures. You can do a QR code. You can do all that, but you're still not really interacting with the computer itself, because like it's if you're at a table and you have a bunch of different documents in front of you, you can really collaborate in a way that's just a lot more um, it's more like you're doing research. Like it is possible you can have a conversation with someone on a phone and reference all these different um, ideas and media and stuff. But when you have a desktop, you can sort of meditate on the collaborative process. So if you're using something like these are some games here, but if you're using if you're running a word processor and then you have a bunch of like files on your desktop, and you're just taking notes, you can compare a lot of these ideas. You're not just the application isn't just waiting for your input. Like the whole user interface is really only able to play like one. I mean, you could do like a split screen or so, but you can't really compare things side by side. It looks like he's just playing mainly games here. Let me see if there's some other apps here. There might be another video that I can think of, but I remember quite a few more apps than the ones that he plays here. Let me see if I can find another one.
On an objective level, but on a subjective level, I think these things are great because they remind me of childhood. It's the kind of computers I grew up with. I had a Packard Bell in '95.
So file manager, it's kind of like Windows Explorer.
I was familiar with them.
I didn't use Prodigy. I just used Juno for a few years. And
Computer stores, they were always.
I did have Microsoft. Oh, that was the one. I thought it was Microsoft Word. But yeah, Microsoft Works was basically the word processor. And it was pretty impressive. This is Microsoft Word. Well, I must have used this probably on Windows 98 or maybe I did have Microsoft Works. But I used Microsoft Works too, and I Let me see if I can find it. Microsoft Word, utilities, Microsoft. Huh. Microsoft Word, other Word. Now this might not have been it. Maybe Word 3.0? No, that's probably even older. Microsoft Works. Windows 95.
Always on display somewhere, especially places like Circuit City. Anyway, applications, though, this is another thing. Look at the bloat. So much stuff came with.
And they say it is bloat, but it's not really bloat the way we think of it today, because these could still run pretty fast as just based on the well, the start menu, of course, was running a little bit faster, but it was still loading most of these pretty quickly, and obviously the operating system was a lot simpler back then, but just to see that something at 100 megahertz could run all these programs is still pretty impressive, which just makes me wonder, what else could run on 100 megahertz today if they just had a very simple menu for offline applications.
It requires a CD. Most of these CDs there that is amazing and is.
And then yeah, like there was things like Quicken, and I didn't use that I didn't have to do taxes when I was 10, but these were all these other softwares that were available, but apparently they were just like not needed for a lot of uh, desktop. But I don't know if it was a demo version, but just having all this software, like after having like no computer at all, it's just kind of like I don't know, an avalanche of software. So maybe I'm making this video because it just sort of influenced me in a way that, like, maybe I can't imagine life without computers or something, or it has just become a completely different way of thinking about everything. Not that you have to be, um, a computer user to understand everything, um, but um, it could be a good learning guide, I guess. Like if you're trying to get into computers, or maybe you don't have any experience with desktops. I mean, maybe some people prefer phones and they can do all of their work from a phone, but obviously I know there are some jobs where you don't have to, use a desktop, or you don't you can do a lot of work from a phone. But there's just a lot more. I kind of see it as like a dexterity type of advantage, because if you have only two arms, you can only manage two different tasks, assuming those hands are used for, handling one, object. If you work in a warehouse and you're moving, boxes, you might be able to use two hands to pick up, one light box. But when you're using a computer, it's kind of like having an extra hand for, managing, processing documents, sorting documents. So it kind of gives you like a third hand just um, to navigate. And then not only that, but you're also like an explorer. So you're learning new things about the world. It's kind of like, you're an explorer or window navigator, but you're not really. I mean, it's virtual, but it's not always real, of course. But you still kind of get an idea of what's out in the world. So even though you're kind of just sort of engrossed in this computer, you're sort of learning, you're studying like someone who might have to explain the world to you, but that the limitation is based on how much time they have to tutor you or to teach you. So maybe the best benefit of computers, at least at the time, were that that one could learn more, could study more, just by studying the information that the computer contained. This is a shelf version of the apps, so you could, if you wanted to see the applications displayed on a shelf, I guess you could use this program if it helped made it easier to visualize what programs you had. So apparently this could be like a more convenient way to analogize, to make an analogy of what programs you're using. I barely use this CD, but I know that it was sort of like a more elegant way of displaying the applications. I mean, if you go on your phone today, you're going to see something like this. Actually, it actually looks more similar to your phone today than what a start menu does. But if you know what a start menu does, you don't really need to use something like this, because you might be more literate. Like you might just look for the name of the program, or a small icon. So you using something like this, it's obviously very visually intensive in the sense that it has to load all this like 3D graphics or accelerated graphics. And obviously the phones today can use that, but to have something like this, if you maybe are not familiar with computers, or you're just not really predisposed to anything that appears to have a lot of technical information, having your applications, displayed on a shelf, apparently has some sort of analogy to maybe a book. Like if you're reading the book and you're looking for a book on a shelf, you might see this application to be something similar to it, in the sense that you're going to be reading stuff from well, not reading, but reading and writing on like something like Microsoft Notepad. But at the same time, it's sort of an awkward way to present it, because it's just a picture. It may not be, common sense that this can turn into something that you're going to be interacting with. So it's kind of just an arbitrary. Maybe it's sort of like this display of applications, but it's not intended to maybe convey any other meaning other than just like showing off of all these programs. I don't know. It's just this a weird environment where you're kind of just taking a tour of all the applications, but I mean, you might be able to click on them and they might be like shortcuts. I don't remember, but it looks like click this category to change the software on your right to learning and reference titles.
And such, but here, look at this. They were doing this 25 years ago. So again, very Microsoft Bob, like just, here's some quick ways to access things, or like, oh, I just want to do such and such. I want to view a tax report. How do I do that? Well,
so it looks like it does load
you do it with the mid 90s. That's
some of the
Microsoft
applications.
Again, the aesthetic is just perfect. Another thing I want to show real quick is the media controller. I showed it really briefly earlier, but you can play in terms of a playlist of MIDI files. And let's go over to...
So yeah, I mean, this obviously had a better speaker. So it had like a built-in speaker on it, so you could hear some of the sounds on it.
in the office, another tower in a bedroom or something. I don't know. And because TVs have remotes, why not a computer? You can see the thought behind it. Anyway, let's play this, and I have it right now set to the wavetable sound of the Audio Galaxy. And yes, the speakers really do sound terrible. Really, really bad. In fact, the little speaker cone.
So yeah, I had the same exact speakers, and I can't say they were good, but they were speakers, so I used them like they were just like a telephone. I mean, a telephone didn't really have great sound when we used the landline. So I was really just comparing it to that. I mean, obviously, if you really cared about, good sound, I'm sure there were better speakers out there, and I didn't really um, I didn't really get better speakers until like several years later. Um, so I mean, obviously sound can be very important to some people, but like just having a computer that was able to play CDs, play floppies, connect to the internet, type papers, print papers, like they called these things multimedia machines or multimedia PCs because they were dealing with not just, three or four things, but they were dealing with so many different things. You could almost call it like a renaissance or like this era where it was just like this golden age of knowledge just kind of just expanding so quickly that no one could really keep track of all the advancements that were happening. And obviously there was quite a bit of enthusiasm at the time. I mean, I never really thought about making videos like this just because it just never occurred to me like until recently that like not everybody grew up, with this sort of like really optimistic part of their life, I guess. Like maybe you grew up in a different era where you maybe didn't have one, or maybe you wanted one at the time, or maybe you grew up in the same time as me and you didn't have it and you wanted it, or you were born much later and like none of these things were really used. And I just thought, if you just wanted to know like my opinion, and I don't know, maybe there's like 3 or 4 people who actually listen to this video, and that's fine. I don't care even if one person or 0 listen to it. but I know that maybe someone might wanna be someone might be curious about what that era was like at the time, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And just knowing that, it's just like the era today is not really keeping up in some ways with like the magnificence of this time, because there were so many great things that happened even on a Packard Bell, which I think wasn't really like the coolest computer at the time. I mean, obviously there was Apple, of course. It was really expensive, and the computer that we had, the 3540, it was $1,299, which was just around the time that the computers started to decrease in price while still giving you a lot of features like multimedia, all that. So obviously it's hard to compare it to anything that was produced in the 1980s or the 70s, which where it was even rarer to have. So every single era, every single decade changed dramatically, from the 90s, and obviously there's a lot more. There's a lot more, um, desktops and laptops today. You almost saw like a resurgence from the pandemics, and so many people work from home and needed to use a computer with a monitor and a desktop and a keyboard and a hardwired. Like all of that just never was a super top priority, unless you're like a student or you work in an office. But for all other people who had other types of like light light office work, like that almost became the norm. And maybe there were some people who were like, hey, this is great. Like they probably didn't really need a computer, but because they had to go home, they probably had to use some more permanent type of uh, desktop setup. So just the fact that these desktops kind of became abandoned, in the sense it's like, oh well, I'm not going to need that anymore. It just it kind of, I don't know. It maybe there's just a lot of, maybe like the idea of a computer is so limited in the sense that it doesn't always have like an immediate application. But I mean, for me, it's just like exploring is just part of the journey. Like it's just you can learn so much about a computer just by navigating around and seeing what it can do. Of course, it's not for everyone, um, but just learning about what a computer can do can actually, could lead to other jobs, or could lead to, um, maybe developing software or developing, new businesses, not just jobs, but like new new types of service economy, that sort of thing. And obviously, like these, I mean, it's just a computer, right? Like, why is there so much hype about it? But it's amazing how, like, even 30 years later, it's not so much about the internet anymore. I mean, there's this article here, and it's basically saying offline is just online with extreme latency. It's just trying to drive home the point that yes, everything you do is needed. I mean, everything you do online is needed because you have to communicate, and ultimately you have to send information and receive information, and a lot of times it has to be very synchronous. But most of the learning is happening in your brain. It doesn't have to be online. So if you're just thinking or ruminating over work, productive uh, methods, whatever you're working on, doesn't always have to be done in real time. And sometimes it doesn't even work very well when you're trying to do it in real time. Obviously, if you're measuring productivity, you kind of need to be able to track that someone isn't just leaving their computer on and having like some mechanical. They have that thing where it keeps the mouse moving, so the person can determine, so the employer like can't see if the person is really active or not, because the only thing they have to track it is whether they are keeping their mouse moving. So so obviously these are all sorts of ways that productivity is measured, whether you clock in or you clock out. But just knowing that, I grew up before the internet was even a thing, it's almost like a foreign idea that productivity has to be that productivity doesn't have to actually be tied to online status, because most of my time, from 1995 or 96, it was offline. It was not online. Like, I didn't have dial-up internet until like 1998. So I was learning a lot about computers, but I wasn't even using the internet. I was just using CDs. I was maybe studying like how the application work. I was writing papers. I was using the encyclopedia. Like, it had, thousands of articles, and the CDs were 650 megabytes. So, I mean, I read all the articles? Maybe not, but I probably read, several hundred encyclopedia articles, just because I didn't have internet. And I think it's important to to be more mindful about reading and writing before, socializing. Because not to say that everyone needs to be a blogger or a writer, but tweeting is really like the extreme manifestation of the social network era. It's like the most efficient way to communicate, in the sense that early on, like, tweets were meant to be 160 characters, but there also wasn't something called the thread roll. And the reason we have thread rolls is because there's not enough, words that people can fit in a single tweet. So now you have like this thing called the thread roll. And I don't, use Twitter anymore, but at the time, there were people who had to write things, and then they couldn't fit it all on one tweet. So now you have like this. It might be kind of a way to kind of get people hooked on a certain tweet blog, because you're reading the format of a bunch of different tweets in a row instead of just reading an essay. And there's newspapers that have like, essays, or they have articles for the Sunday paper instead of like the breaking. So there's this whole other idea of news called slow journalism. And what it basically means is that a lot of the news that we read today is basically fast journalism. It's really just to, arrest your attention, to really to try to get your attention. Not because the story is really that important. I mean, obviously sometimes it is, but mainly it's because, you know media um, media sites need to make money, and the reason they use these tricks is just basically clicks are ad revenue. That's how ad revenue is determined. So if there's a number of views for an article, the advertiser will pay proportionally based on how many people most likely saw, that article or that advertisement on that article with ads, assuming you don't have a pop-up blocker. But the whole problem with this is that being informed and having disinformation, it becomes a worse problem, basically, because we're consuming not, media that's necessarily bad, but it's being driven by different motivation, or profit motives. But again, that's not necessarily bad in itself. It's just that it becomes a pattern that that affects just sort of like the basic learning process, to not that you have to learn how to use a computer, but knowing how a computer works can allow someone to basically teach themselves about stories, and learn how to think for themselves. Like if you're reading an article and you're not really sure if it's true, you have the tools available to you to think critically, and obviously learning how to read and write are important, but learning how to analyze and comprehend stories require more critical analysis, because obviously some articles can be very persuasive and some might not be. But when you have the ability to read an encyclopedia like Microsoft Encarta, which I believe was on here. Let me just check here. MS Encarta. MS. Well, I had a 95, but oh, here it is. So I had this encyclopedia, and I could click on any. Well, I guess there isn't really a whole lot here. Let's try another one. You could just click on any article and it would just be there. Like you wouldn't have to go online to read it. Now, obviously, some of this information was very basic and not very controversial. But if you wanted to access it, you could just type in what you wanted to know, and then you would have the article, and it would all be offline. So this was one of the included CDs with my Packard Bell. So I had this, and obviously you could even get the same with Wikipedia, but it's not going to be the same kind of experience, since there's quite a bit more articles, and just a whole lot more editing. So not to say you really need it, but I wanted to go back into this here because I think they cover a little bit more about offline collaboration, multiple people. And also, like, yeah, software that is offline or has an offline version doesn't, even if it may not be supported, at least it runs. Like one of the advantages of having software offline is that it doesn't require an internet connection at the most basic level. But obviously support and other things can be an issue if it stops working and well, it stops working or it loses a function or is missing a function. Obviously, yes, if it's offline, it's not gonna have that. But it isn't to say that you can't just get a new one if it was being supported online. That would be something that wouldn't be exclusive to being a web app. So yeah, responsive apps are important, and yeah, online, um, having apps that can be used in real time are only important as so much as that the collaborative process is that requires it. But as for asynchronous work, most productivity happens, um, at least that I can think of, is when you already have enough work that doesn't require an internet connection. That there's quite a bit of work that can be done without any type of online distraction or um, just even yeah just being online, it can be very time consuming because there's just a lot of other distractions that are not really relevant. So yeah, measuring productivity can be it can be hard to measure because obviously you don't always know how much um, productivity you, productivity you lose after you might have your most productive worker leave, and then you realize that a lot of the work you were already getting um, done for you was actually kind of quietly being um, completed, but it wasn't being announced. So it's possible that some companies may feel or be understaffed just based on how productivity is underreported, I would say. So yeah, that's really one of the reasons I wanted to make this video. I saw this video and I mean I saw this blog, and I immediately thought of this Packard Bell that I had 30 years ago, and it just struck me that this type of computer, even 10 years later, was already you know um, something that just doesn't really happen anymore. I mean, you can build your own computer and install a CD-ROM or DVD Blu-ray player, but how many people are actually going to use all these offline programs when you have internet access? I mean, obviously, you can still make it so you don't need internet access, but it's still practical to have internet just like it was back in 95. It's just that the modem was not and never really was supposed to be the primary reason. And not because it was slow. I mean, it was plenty fine. I could use Windows. I could use AOL Instant Messenger. I could browse the web. They had browsers that could support. I think it was Netscape Navigator and maybe Internet Explorer. I don't remember which one I used, but I think it was Internet Explorer. It was probably like 1.0 or maybe 2.0. But yeah, this video is just, it's so, I don't know what to say. I didn't really like script this thing just because I don't like scripting my videos, but I know they might turn out a lot longer without scripting it, just because I sometimes don't know what to say. But at the same time, I also want to ensure that this video is as organic as possible and not forced in a way where it's like I had all this stuff to sell to you. But but these were the screensavers back then, and they really saved the screen because they were just preventing it from.
So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say that
They were preventing the screen from, I guess, getting like a burn in or something if you have it on.
is about it for this video on the Packard Bell.
Like burning in the image, not like catching fire, but like if you had a black screen and it's just keeping the thing moving, that it might not, cause a permanent. I guess it was like etching, maybe. I don't really know, but I mean, you're at least saving power with something like this.
Corner PC. Just wanted to let you know what it's all about, beyond the aesthetic, and really beyond that, there's not a lot going on. It's just a Packard Bell from the mid 90s with a crazy case design that is a little bit confusing when you think about it. I really wish that it had like a flat front and was angled on the back. It probably wouldn't look as cool, but it would actually achieve the whole space saving.
I don't know. I don't think it's a terrible design. It's kind of convenient in the sense that you could put a keyboard there, and it kind of gives you a little bit more space in front of it. Plus, it kind of matches the monitor more so than really prioritizing what you have in front. But I agree it's not the best design and not really useful. It does kind of make sense in the sense that you don't really open or close the CD-ROM drive very often, so it doesn't really need to be facing you. And then second, it does kind of create a little bit more space for the keyboard because it looks like it can be pushed a little bit underneath it, and that might save a little bit of space on your desk. But considering it is a corner type, it's not really designed to be put on the side of your desk or like on on the middle part of the desk. But at the same time, a lot of the seating positions for corner desks, unless it's an actual L-shaped desk, would be a lot, more ergonomically simpler to use if that was also if the seating of the desk could be put under the desktop, because if you're sitting at a desk and it's on the right or on the left side of where you're sitting, you kind of have to turn your you have to tilt your neck like 90 or 45 degrees, and that's not really a good seating position. But overall, it's a good computer. Like, I didn't have any issues with it when I was using it. Obviously, I learned how to fix it sometimes if it crashed, or if I wanted to install a 28K modem, I was able to upgrade it. I don't think I ever upgraded the. I definitely did not upgrade the video memory, or maybe I did, but it had to be an ISA card because they didn't have PCI for video cards. Or I didn't use it. I used it for like the 28K modem, or I think I might have used it for a different sound card. No, the sound card I think was ISA too. There was like 2 or 3 ISA slots, and those were basically like the PCIe slots of that era, but they were not fast. But it really brings back a lot of memories. That you can see a little bit more inside of it here. So these were the ISA slots. This is the PCI. That makes a lot more sense because it was definitely a lot smaller, and the color was white. But this is I don't know if this is a 100 megahertz, but the base model of this corner was 100 megahertz, 8 megabyte. But yeah, this all reminds me of exactly how mine was, because it was so that was about 1.5 gigs, 1.6 gigs. I mean, that's still the same format as today, 3.5. And they used the IDE 100. Well, this is a very good video because it's got very good quality computer, and it has no dust and everything, so you get a really good video close up. VGA. So some of the newer video cards might have had like one or two, maybe 4, maybe 8 megabytes of RAM. And yeah, the PS2 port is the same as, I still have one, and I can still use it because even my graphics cards, my Gigabyte motherboard has a PS2. It's like a hybrid slot where you can use a mouse or a keyboard, but not both. But most of the time you're only going to be using one. And then you can even get like a USB adapter if you want to use the PS2, but only have a USB, but you want to connect it to an older computer. They always included one or two. I ended up getting like 3 or 4 of them that I still have in storage, but I've never used them because obviously most computers have. Oh, that was one thing. I think this Packard Bell had one. I think it had one USB 1.0 port on the back. Let me check. And it was so foreign at the time. It was like USB. Like, what do we need that for? Did it have USB? And it wasn't really called USB. It was called Universal Serial Bus because that's what it was. It was like Universal was the new thing. So calling it USB was not really helpful at all because people needed to know what it was. Let me check if they have it. That would be. I think it had one USB. I want to find out. I'm gonna just end this video with that because I've already covered too much. But I had one computer. I might have been a hand-me-down later that I picked up, and I remember that had a one USB port. But let me check here. Packard Bell 3540, and it was all the way at the bottom on the back. That would be something if it had USB. That would be so interesting. And I mean, of course, it wasn't fast, but it still allowed you to connect like USB sticks and not really a whole lot. I mean, you could connect a newer printer to it, but the support also depended on Windows 95. I think I eventually upgraded it to Windows 98, but I don't think I upgraded it more than that. And this would be really hard to find if it had USB. USB. I mean, for it to support USB in 1995, I mean, that would be. Let me check here. You don't really have any. Maybe they already cover it here.
Two M3 screws around back hold RAM drive. Gate. For sound, Packard Bell supplied an Aztec Sound Galaxy Galaxy fax modem combo card, as they often did. And on there is a Crystal CS4231A and Aztec's AZT2316R, providing a 16-bit stereo DAC Windows sound system.
Here we go. I think I found it.
Serial port and PS2 ports for mouse.
Oh, I was just here. Well, I guess I could find out based on the date that USB was made. USB was released in 1996, although I did... $1996. I mean, it was definitely 1.0, but I think I might have had a newer computer that had it, and it only had 1.95 megabits. That's about 240 KB, which is still plenty fast. But did it have it? Let me check it. I don't think it had it, but I want to just check it. See if I can get a picture of the back. Packard Bell 3540. That would be pretty... I think it was released in 1996, but I don't think this one had it. I mean, it would have been... It would have been like one of the first to have it. It does not play CDRs. I don't remember it not playing CDRs. Upgradable to 2, but I think you had to use like an ISA card. Upgradable to 128. Even then, RAM was so expensive, I never upgraded it. I don't think I ever upgraded it. Motherboard. That's a really hard question. That's probably not it, no. 3540. Okay, I'm probably wasting too much time here. It most likely didn't have it, but well, not that it would matter. I mean, it's just one of those things, like, at the time there was so much other internet, other peripherals that were useful. It just, like, yeah, why would anyone use it? Universal serial bus. No. Local bus video. I mean, it had a modem built in, and that was pretty standard by then. Adjustable microphone. The microphone was not good at all. Like, you could barely hear any of it. And if you spoke too close to it, it would just sound really like you couldn't even understand it. On-site service. We never needed on-site service. I mean, I think it got a good, like, 5 years out of it. But so much had changed by then that, you know, by 98, 99, the computers were a lot faster, and it already felt old at, 96 or so. So, getting it to use it for papers was okay, but, like, it didn't really have a whole lot of upgradability. So it's amazing it lasted as long as it did. But today, I mean, you can use a computer from from 10 years ago or even almost 15 years ago and it'll still run fine. But yeah, let me see this one here. If I can get a back picture of one of these, maybe it'll kind of give a hint at what. Oh, that one looks a little newer. There's got to be a back picture of one of these. Okay. Like this was probably a little higher end at the time, and I don't think it even had, it doesn't look like it had USB. I mean, that's just a sound card and serial VGA. That's a modem. That's not an Ethernet. And I don't think they even had Ethernet. Because who would need that? Let me see what else. No. I'm trying to think of another one that might have had it. Just curious. Ooh. MPC 130. Okay, a little bit faster. So if this didn't have it, then the one I had probably didn't have it either. Full duplex. So this is a little bit nicer. 1.2, barely more space. But let's check out the back of this. That would be something. Okay, well it does have an Ethernet, but that could have been installed later. There's no indication that that was part of it. It just makes sense. Like even if it wasn't included, it probably didn't have it. So USB most likely would have been at the time, almost certainly, it would have been on the base part. So it would have. I mean, there probably was a PCI adapter for USB, but I mean, if this thing didn't have it, and I don't know the date. Where's the date? Does it say 97 or 96 here? Well, this probably wasn't 97, but I'm gonna go with no. I mean, it probably did not have USB. In fact, USB was only released in 96, or it was specified. First released, okay. Now I'm really curious. First USB 1.0 desktop. Okay. Ooh, wow. 95, 90. Yeah, they don't really say what devices had it, but obviously by 98 a lot of things had it. Really? 98? The iMac G3 released in 98 was the first computer to have USB ports only, not serial parallel. Never mind. But there's nothing wrong with PS2 ports. It's just that it became very convenient for lots of other drives, like storage drives and webcams and USB 1.0. First desktop. Maybe this has it. Yeah, you would think they would have a story. It's like this was the first computer that had it. Well, if I haven't bored you enough, I'm gonna sign out.